welcome back to Boot Camp. This is our third training segment. This particular segment is committed to the subject of missional engagement. We take our cue from texts like 1 Corinthians chapter 9, where Paul says that he becomes all things to all people so that he might win some. In that, Paul is doing what Jesus did. He's accommodating himself to his listeners, wanting to reach them and shape his message in a way that they will receive the story of God's great work in Christ. So, why is this lesson so important? Well, because church planting is relational work, but it's done in a missional and incarnational manner. So, we want to go out in mission, but go deep in incarnational presence. And so this study is designed to help you do that as we do mission work in North America in a very unique time. Unique places for each one of us. Here's how you can prepare for this lesson today. You should have a Mission Insight demographic study of your planting area in probably a 2 and a 5 mile radius, along with the Mission Impact Guide and the top 3 mosaic types identified. It's something that's really integral to doing the kind of demographic work that needs to be done. There's a wonderful webpage called 10 Networking and Evangelism Strategies that you can find on the conference site. And then there's the Launch Partnership brochure that's also on the conference website, and we're going to talk about that. And then make sure you view Alan Hirsch and Michael Frost's podcast, in which they talk about how to interpret a community. Then The Lean Startup. You can find reviews of that book on the internet. It's also an excellent book to purchase to become aware of some of the principles that are being taught there in a business context, but that have a lot of application to this particular element of our church planter training. The nuts and bolts of church planting, once you get past kind of the deliverables, if you will, is at the core about researching a community and unlocking or discovering what the missional code is to bring the gospel to people in a way that's meaningful to them in that setting. That's what Paul was referring to in 1 Corinthians 9, and that's what the Mission Insight study can allow you to do, along with other strategies to assess your target community. The first thing that you'll want to go after, as I mentioned a few moments ago, is to get that Mission Impact Guide for your study area or for your target area. And then get deep into that study and understand the mosaic types that are most prevalent in your study area. There are 72 different lifestyle types in North America today. The Mission Impact Guide has been designed by Tom Bandy to help you gain insight into the uniqueness of lifestyle groups. So as you think about designing your plant, you're trying to answer the question, what will people respond to? What will they find to be value added to their lives? What kind of gospel incarnation will they be most responsive to? The Mission Impact Guide and Mission Insight data will help you begin to get a picture of that. In many cases, what you're doing is you're developing a hypothesis that you have to test. It's a value hypothesis, to use the language from the Lean Startup. It's a value hypothesis about what you think people would value in the environment that you're seeking to plant. A lot of times we make assumptions about people. We make assumptions about what they would value. I've heard church planters and noticed sometimes people make faulty assumptions, premature assumptions, presumptuous assumptions. In one particular case, I remember a church planter who just assumed that if they had a great band, that would unlock the interest in returning to church and they'd be having a successful church plant. This was a number of years ago when contemporary worship was still somewhat creative. This particular planter was frustrated whenever that didn't work. And it wasn't until he dug more deeply into what the real hunger was in that context that he really was able to unlock what people would respond to. Doing diligence around assessing the target community and getting a sense of who they are and what makes them tick, what their hungers and their hopes and their interests and responsiveness triggers are, is really part of what Mission Insight can help you accomplish. One way to discern that is to look at other recent church plant efforts in the area that you're working as tests of the market. In some cases, you really are wise to take the results of another church planter's efforts and use it as a test of a similar market that you're trying to break into. Now, that's not to say there aren't multiple ways of getting into a community. You can get into a community through a new generational approach to church. You can get into it with an ethnic dimension. Multicultural churches sometimes will draw a certain number of people that even a generational church may not. So there's a variety of ways of thinking about how you're going to unlock a community and find a way of bringing the gospel to them. I spoke with a church planter recently who is working in the area of recovery. There's a unique population in most any urban area or substantial community. There's a population of folks that are struggling with recovery, and that it's possible to plant a congregation that really revolves around a critical life issue. There's not many of those, but recovery, multicultural, there are some galvanizing factors that can draw people together and open up a community's interest in a new congregation. And so discerning that and testing your assumptions about that and observing the effectiveness of other church plants in an area as they test the same market is one way of becoming wise and thoughtful about your missionary context. Another strategy, and this I would offer as a recommendation, to get out and burn off some shoe leather with 50 different community leaders. Take the position as a learner. Here's some questions. If you could interview 50 community leaders in your setting and get an answer to what have they learned about the unique nature of their community, what special needs are below the surface, what have they learned as an entrepreneur in their community that's helped them be successful in their venture, if indeed they are an entrepreneur. Introduce yourself and get to know them and begin to build contacts that we talked about earlier. Approach them as a fellow startup leader. You can ask them what they've learned about serving their community as a small business or nonprofit that they could share with you. And is there anything you could ever do for them to serve them? And then could you stay in touch with them? Could you connect with them several times a year and drop by their place of business just to keep the relationship fresh and stay in touch with how you might serve them? There's the 3-point strategy there in your notes of how you can begin to network into the community. I talked with a fellow a number of years ago who did this. He connected with the owner of a flower shop, and the owner of the flower shop passed this particular church planter's contact information on to a wedding planner whom they worked with all the time. And next thing you know, the church planter was getting the phone calls to officiate at weddings and to help couples that did not have a faith community. It opened up for this particular church planter a whole network of connections that continually came their direction and helped them build out their reach into the community. One of the smartest things you can do is introduce yourself to all the other pastors in town and put yourself again in the position of a learner with them. As a result of that data collection, you can perhaps begin to develop a value hypothesis for your target group. Begin to build a plan to test that value hypothesis. What unique predicament does your community find itself in that your church may be able to meet? That really takes developing a missional strategy. Some of these things we've talked about, of joining organizations strategically, serving in strategic volunteerism. I knew a planter a number of years ago who volunteered to be a chaplain in a local hospital. What a smart move that was, because as you can imagine, they were making connections with people on a regular basis and had kind of an open, assumed invitation to introduce themselves, just to build relationship with people. As a pastor in town, you don't need to disclose that you're a pastor that's planting a church necessarily, or that you don't currently have public worship. As you develop relationship with folks, it may become natural for you to say more about what you're doing. But whenever it's used appropriately, those volunteer roles, volunteering in any number of kinds of public service roles, can be so valuable in the work of networking.
Being in the community was one of the key things of coming to Salem and being able to start a church, was to be able to get to know the people, for them to get to know me. It was a huge part of my beginnings. And so my first month, I didn't preach, I didn't do anything. I would walk up and down Main Street. I would walk into businesses and talk to people. So I would sit in the hair salons and just hang out and talk and meet people, to go to a pastry shop and just sit. I would ask people, where do I need to go to meet people? I would go to the places where people would say, I don't know if you really should go there, like the back room of a gas station where the coffee drinkers meet, and they say it gets pretty vulgar. I said, I don't care, I just need to meet people. And so I would go and listen. It was an opportunity for me to meet people where they were at. So I spent the first 4 months really investing in the community. It wasn't comfortable when I first started doing it. The jitters are always still there. How are people going to perceive me? Someone always told me, they said, if you're building relationships with people and it's not awkward, you're probably not doing it right. So maybe not the first time that I ran into someone did I invite them, but I would be intentional on the third or fourth time of seeing someone saying, hey, on December, we're going to be launching just down the road. We would love for you to join us. And it was amazing to see the people that I was building relationship, the people that came through the doors. A lot of the same principles that I've been sharing are the things that I try to train people within our church. When we get together, especially from our leadership teams, we go through some of these trainings of how do we approach somebody? What are some questions that we can ask someone first time we meet them? How do we sustain conversation with someone? And then how do we invite people to come to church? Some people grasp it better than others. I think it's just important that we continue to teach the fundamentals of conversation. You might laugh at some of these simple things. We simply tell someone when you meet someone to smile, share your name, and shake their hand. It's amazing how many people don't want to do that. From there, I always ask probing questions, and this is what I try to teach, is saying, try to find a common ground with someone. So you ask them their name, you ask them their family, you ask them their job, you ask them their hobbies. Hey, what's your hobbies? What do you like to do? And they say, oh, I love to golf. Me too. I love to golf. I know there's a golf course here. Have you golfed here? Take a genuine interest in the things that they're passionate about, and they just light up. And most of the time after that, you don't have to do hardly any talking. They do the talking for you. I've always found that the next time you meet them, they're going to bring up that previous conversation. And from there, I can start telling them things that I'm passionate about. That's where it takes time. You're able to open up their soul and their excitement. And from there, you can really go deep with someone to a point of inviting them to something that might seem scary to them, like church. I have what I call a contacts list journal. If I go into, let's say, the salon and there are 5 people in there, I intentionally ask their name. With that, I try to remember the best I can. And I try to remember as much of the conversation that I have with these 5 people. And when I get into my car, the first thing I do is I pull out my contact journal and I write down the 5 people's names, some characteristics of who they are, and maybe one thing that I can remember from our conversation. And I study that. And this is the huge thing about relationships, is if I can go that second time, I can go in there and say, "Hey Kathy, it's nice to see you again. How's your kids doing? I know last time you said this." It is an art. It takes a lot of work and effort to be able to remember people's names and what's important to them. What drives me to really be out in the community and build relationships is the Great Commission, to go and make disciples. When I read the scriptures, I see Jesus continually moving and meeting people where they're at. I just have this deep sense to say, I can't expect people to come to me. I need to go to them for them to know that I care before they can care about me. Where we're at in the planting stage has changed, but I'm very intentional to make sure 5 to 8 hours of my week is out in the community so people can see me and that I can continue to develop new relationships with other people.
Your goal is to meet 1,000 people and get contacts for 1,000 people prior to launch, to get contact information from them. And then, and now here's the important thing, to begin to develop a prayer log, journaling each contact for daily prayer. And you say, is that even possible? Oh yeah, it is. It absolutely is. In fact, this idea has been tested again and again and found to be genuinely effective. One of the largest church planting agencies in North America, the Assemblies of God, has this as a typical protocol for their planter developers. And they observe that whenever they instituted this little strategy of not only developing contacts, but developing the prayer journal and daily prayer, needn't be long, very brief prayers, in fact, as you just survey the journal of names that you're building and you pray a blessing over people, and you pray God's favor on them, and you pray for hope and healing, the prevenient presence of the Holy Spirit in their lives, and pray for them by name. Take an hour out of your day, 45 minutes, different segments of time. That what happens is that not only does it begin to build your recollection of names and faces whenever you see them in the grocery store or whatever, but it genuinely has been demonstrated to affect the kind of launch that church plants have. That is to say, Steve Pike from the Assemblies of God, he said that he noticed after he data tracked this, that churches, that pastors had been under this new protocol of prayer for their contacts, they consistently launched at a higher level numerically than the congregations that had not done so prior to that protocol. I'm not trying to suggest that there's a rabbit foot thing going on here. I'm just saying that prayer works, and there is something that's powerful whenever you begin to pray for people and you see them. You're at the bank and you're swapping a brief comment with that teller that you met a month ago, and you say to them just before you leave, you said, "Hey, I prayed for you today because I remember whenever I met you last time, you were having a rough day, and so I told you I would pray for you." That will amaze people, and they'll want to know what planet you've come from, what good you're up to. So don't take that lightly. Part of your work at this phase is relationship building. Anything you can do to enhance that process of not just collecting lots of names, but going deep in relationship at an appropriate pace, anything you can do that way is part of the work. It is definitely part of the work of the gathering phase that you're in right now. As you collect those names, categorize them. Some will be committed. They're the ones that are going to sign your launch partnership brochure. And it may take them, of course, a period of time to do so, but you'll have a category of the committed. I believe I mentioned the launch partnership brochure as a template that exists on the website, the conference website. I strongly recommend that you develop and design your own launch partnership brochure that will be unique to your setting, but we'll talk about it in a moment. You'll have those that are involved. That is to say, they're connecting to your events. They're involved to some extent in small group or other gatherings you have, but they've not yet responded and said they'll make a commitment. And then there'll be those that are interested. These are folks that show up less frequently. They're occasional. They seem to be interested, but they're certainly not involved in any kind of a consistent way. And finally, there will be folks that are prospects. They're your furthest on the fringe. You've made a contact with them, but they've really responded with no thanks, not now kind of language. So those are 4 categories for you then to begin to cultivate, be aware of, and think about how folks are responding to your development of those relational networks. Utilize your existing team to develop a plan to further network, serve, and discern the community needs and opportunities for service, because your team will have insights and will have thoughts and reflections that will help you tune up your perceptions that may be in need of modifying as we all work on getting a sense of a community and where there is missional opportunity within them. I want to direct you towards the Michael Frost video. Frost and Hirsch are excellent in this. And as you view that video with your team, this is an excellent team exercise is how does Frost help you build a strategy for missional engagement in your context, and what action do you need to take? The next step really around missional engagement is revising your vision frame. Because as you developed your vision frame in our first lesson together, you've collected a lot of data and will collect a great deal of data through this exercise of missional engagement. And it may behoove you to adjust your vision, value, strategy, measurements, and mission statements. So this is a good time to make edits that way or to shift your thinking that way. That vision frame can remain fairly pliable for several weeks or months during the pre-launch phase. As you grow closer towards the preview phase, and certainly probably 3 to 6 months into the pre-launch phase, your vision frame should be firming up and become less and less negotiable. Revise that vision frame, tweak it, and then work on creating your web page and engaging social media as a way of working on getting your front door and your community contacting and your connective work rolling. You also want to create business card probably. Those still are used. That'll all require you designing your logo and putting together your first impressions, and those will all become useful whenever we get to the phase of promotions as well. And then develop your launch partnership brochure. Mentioned this a moment ago. You can find an example of this on the conference website. What the launch partnership brochure does for you is it gives you a promotional piece to share with another person who shows any level of interest. Whenever you introduce yourself as a person that's planning a church, initially your conversation may be somewhat unstructured with a person as they're just curious about you. If that person shows some real interest, if you have an appropriate environment to be seated with them or otherwise give them a little bigger picture of what you're up to, the Launch Partner brochure is a great tool to leave with someone and a very simple outline of what does it mean to be a church planter. If you look at that brochure, it identifies the 3 phases of a church plant, like we talked about during the overview of these trainings. The pre-launch or the gathering phase, the preview phase, and then the launch phase. And it identifies the kinds of tasks that you're working on during the gathering phase, and it identifies the kinds of tasks you're working on during the preview phase and during the launch phase. Parallel to that, it identifies the kinds of tasks that you're recruiting people to support you in. It gives a person who's curious about this strange behavior called church planting, it gives them a bird's eye view of what you're doing. And immediately they can begin to get a sense of what you're up to. And if they've demonstrated any real interest in your project, this may help them accelerate their interest, get some clarity about what you're doing as they try to discern what their relationship might be with you. So it's a promotional piece. It outlines those broad strokes, and then attached to it is a commitment form. The Launch Partnership brochure is a great thing to leave with a person who has shown any interest because it calls for them to consider making a commitment to time, talent, and treasure, to get involved in your church plant, to be a part of the team, the launch team. By the way, I prefer launch team to core group. Core group so much creates the sense of insider and outsider, and you want to have a permeable, growing team of people that are going to help launch this new ministry, and that partnership brochure is a great tool to help you do it. Develop your pitch. So your pitch is the opportunity that's going to come when you get a chance to share the ministry that God has sent you on. And it's a little different than the vision frame. It's a little different than your personal calling statement that we talked about earlier. It really is a way of you pitching the ministry in a more, shall we say, popular sort of a way that will connect with people without going down deep into the vision piece so much in the detail that you might, nor is it focusing so much on your own personal calling. It's really pitching your ministry and pitching the planting project. So I've given you a couple of different scenarios that you could pitch your vision to. Number one, you're asked by the bishop to share your new appointment at a special clergy day with 100 people in the room. A couple minutes to prepare and a couple minutes to share. What are you going to say? Developing your pitch for an audience of folks that would be supportive of you, that would be your peers in ministry, your colleagues in ministry. How would you communicate what you're doing for those folks? You're at a local park walking your dog and you connect with somebody else who's walking theirs. The owner picks up a conversation with you, and eventually you ask them what they do for work, and then they ask you the same. What's your pitch? It wouldn't probably be appropriate to pitch your vision frame at that point, right? That's too deep into the mechanics of the plant. It probably wouldn't be appropriate to pitch every dimension of your personal calling. You're invited to lunch with one of your committed team members. And at lunch, a friend of theirs joins you, and your team member introduces you by name, saying that you're their pastor and you're starting a new church. That friend of theirs responds by asking you to tell how you start a church. And so now you have a chance to respond. These opportunities are going to come. There's going to be an opportunity for you to talk about your calling. That opportunity may come with a donor. There's going to be an opportunity for you to talk about your vision. That opportunity may come with a deeply committed partner that's working with you. But there's also going to be these myriad opportunities out in the marketplace with people that you're going to connect with, or that bishop or that DS that puts you on the spot. You're going to want to be able to respond extemporaneously, comfortably, conversationally about the unique project that you're working on in a way that people will be intrigued but also have their curiosity spoken to. Here are the action areas. Number one, distill the data from those early sections that we talked about into a planning document that describes your target group, who they are, what their need, and the gospel opportunity, as well as a preliminary strategy to reach them. How are you going to reach into their world and connect with them based on what you know? What will be the things that you'll do that will unlock and open up the community that you're trying to reach? I'll tell you a story about a project that I'm working with right now. A congregation is trying to unlock their community, and they finally kind of stumbled onto the effectiveness of working with premarital couples. A lot of young millennials in this particular area. So they began to do premarital education, and they began to get a really strong response from young couples that were looking for some group classes that they could attend to start out their married journey on the right foot. So they advertised this through the bridal show in town, and began to offer these classes at regular intervals throughout the year. They built a reputation and they connected with the community that they wanted to connect with, young millennials, young families, but they did it after they had discerned where the need was, where the opportunity was. They built a ministry around that. That principle of finding how you can be value added to a community, begin to build inroads into it, is a critical one. What communication style and leadership style will people best respond to? How will you need to adjust your approach to connect with them? What are 2 to 5 methods that you could use to engage people and potentially add value to their lives? Number 2, begin to make and build those personal contacts, that list of 1,000. Count only the people that you're able to get contact information from and that you're beginning to build a regular systematic prayer ministry for. Aim at 5 people a day, 25 a week, 100 a month for 10 months. Use some of the networking and evangelism resource page ideas to help you get going. Those 4 dimensions of categorizing folks to help you get a sense of folks that got a level of commitment with and those that you should be working on cultivating perhaps a little more intentionally. It'll help you think systematically about this work of gathering and networking. Number 3, in light of the Michael Frost video clip, what action steps do you need to take to connect with your community? Where do you need to go? And what a fun clip to listen to with other members of your team. And as your team grows, to have others listen to this entire lesson perhaps, certainly to hear the Michael Frost clip. Number 4, revise your vision frame so it's more aligned with the field contacts. We talked about that and the conversations and the research you're having. So make those tweaks to your vision frame. 5, get out your post notes to your timeline. What are the action areas here that need to happen? This is something you need to sit back and say, well, okay, there's not only the personal contacts, there's all the community interviewing. When does that need to be done? What dates do I need to put on those post-it notes that we're going to have those community interviews done? And how am I going to break that down into pieces that are doable? There's a lot of work here, and organizing your work is a big part of this process. And using that timeline and the post-it notes can go a long way to help you do that. Develop your web page, social media, develop your own launch partnership brochure, create your own logos. I would encourage you not to deviate too far from the formula that's there. It's a simple formula, it's basic, and it works. It lays out clearly what it is you're doing, what it is you need people to do to be good partners with you at those various phases. And so I encourage you to give consideration to using that as a template that you tweak and modify for your own work. Develop your pitch for the multiple settings. Connect with your coach to review the action areas for this session. Let me remind you, the work of contacting and the work of networking is towards a desired end, that you would find people of peace, to use the phrase from the Gospels, that you would find people that would say, hey, I'm open to getting to know you better. I'm open to connecting with you further. Many of the folks you're going to connect with are folks who have had a church experience in the past, and it may not have been a very good one. And so as you begin to build a connection with them, the hope would be that you'd bring a fresh, incarnational presence of Jesus with them, and they would reconsider being active, activating that slumbering faith and spiritual core that they've let go, and re-upping in their commitment to Christ. As you find some folks that are de-churched, some folks that may be marginally churched, they're not active, even though they may claim that they have a church. Some folks who have not had any church experience whatsoever. And as you begin to gather them together in your own thinking, your goal from the standpoint of organizational development is to see 40, 50, or more folks make that commitment and get into a small group setting. We're going to talk about small group development here very soon. Get into a small group setting to experience what it is to be in community, to take steps, new steps of discipleship and following Jesus. This networking is towards that end. I want to just close with a prayer for you. God in heaven, as these platters move out to connect with new people, step into environments that may feel a little awkward. They sit down at a coffee shop table and they begin to work on getting to know people and breaking the ice. I pray that you would give them what Paul prayed for. Even Paul prayed for courage. It's very tempting to shrink back. And so I pray that you just give them missionary courage. Let it be known that they're about the work of Jesus, to introduce themselves, give their names away, give away their vision, and to see how the Holy Spirit is out ahead of them. Oh God, send your Holy Spirit out ahead of us, as you have promised, and stir up the spiritual life that's deep within the hearts of people that you have made with that God-shaped vacuum. And so I pray for them, and I pray for their networking and their missionary work now, for Christ's sake. Amen.